Fairy knots, single strand knots, whatever it is you decide to call them, they drive us all crazy. So stick around to find out how to minimize them in your natural hair. Hey y'all, my name is Dasha. I'm also known as the hair doula, and today we are going to talk about how to avoid single strand knots, also known as fairy knots, also known as the bane of a curly girl's existence. So I still get these. They kind of suck. Sometimes you gotta live with them. Really, all the times you gotta live with them. But when you have a whole lot of them, you're finding them all the time, then that means there's some things that you could be, improving. Some practices you could upgrade, some things that you could do to kind of mitigate that a little bit. So we're gonna talk about that today. The first thing I recommend you do if you have a whole bunch of fairy knots is to trim your hair. That is one of the indications that it is time for a trim. I was talking to my hairstylist about this recently, and I was like, hey, I've been noticing more single strand knots. What does that mean? She was like, that means it's time for a trim. And I was like, oh. So I went in and I got a trim. And it was better afterwards. Obviously, you're trimming off the single strand knots. Also though, when you have split ends, it's just, they're more raggedy and and it's easier for them to start getting all up in each other. So trim your hair. It's better for you in the long run. Even if you're working to grow your hair, especially if you're working to grow your hair. Trimming your hair is muy importante, okay? Number two, the second thing that you can do to avoid single strand knots is to properly detangle weekly. Weekly, not, every month, not every 2 months, weekly. When you get in the shower or in the sink for some people and you wash your hair, you want to make sure that you are thoroughly and gently detangling your hair. That is going to help make sure that you're not getting fairy knots and just knots in general that you can't get out, or that's really hard to get out, or that's going to cause a lot of damage to your hair when you are getting it out later down the road. So the more on top of detangling you are, the fewer single strand knots you're going to get. Fewer tangles in general you're gonna get as well. Number three, stretch your hair. Now, you may be saying like, but Dasha, you do wash and goes. Yes, I do wash and goes. And when I do wash and goes, in a way I stretch them by setting them under a dryer as opposed to letting my hair shrink, if that makes sense, right? If you've done a wash and go and you just let it air dry, you know that by the time it has air dried, it has shrunken a lot. I know that's the case for me. My hair, goes down here somewhere, and if I do a wash and go and don't air dry it, it's like a little fro, okay? But if you sit under a hooded dryer after you do your wash and go and you set it while it's soaking wet, it's going to be more stretched. And then of course, your typical stretch styles as well. Your twist outs, your braid outs, your bantu knot outs, your threading. Those methods, those stretching methods also help to avoid single strand knots. The reason being is because a single strand knot is formed when one strand of hair gets kind of wrapped up and tangled in itself. I don't know what this is. This is your hair. Anyways, a single strand knot happens when a hair gets tangled in itself. Sometimes it gets tangled with another hair and then that other hair gets out and then the tangle is left in the single strand, okay? And that happens naturally because our hair is curly, right? If our hair was straight, it wouldn't really be happening. But because our hair curls and coils and kinks all over the place, it's easier for it to overlap and make a loop and knot on itself. So if your hair is stretched, so if your hair is usually, like this, and it's easier for it to kind of get tied up on itself, if you stretch it, it's gonna be harder for that to happen. So that's why stretching is a really good method for avoiding single strand knots. Number four, the final one. And this one is really the most important and in a way incorporates the other things that we've talked about. Consistent wash days are extremely important for avoiding single strand knots. You wanna make sure that you are cleansing your hair, that you are conditioning your hair, that you are styling your hair, ideally once a week, maybe more even. Part of the reason that that's so important is because hydrated hair is really important to avoiding those single strand knots. It's really important to making your detangling really, really easy. It's really important to making sure you're not getting split ends and dry hair that's gonna cause you to get those single strand knots and those fairy knots at the end of your hair. So make sure that you are incorporating consistent wash days in your hair routine to avoid problems. Problems in general. More hair, more problems, fewer wash days, more problems. I don't know what I'm saying. But what I'm saying, it is correct. So yes, that's it. Let me know if this is helpful. If there's anything else or any other questions that you have below in the comments. Like this if you liked it. Share this with someone who would find it helpful. Family, friends, a loved one. And of course, if you have not already, subscribe if you would like to see more of this and other kinds of content that I do. I appreciate y'all so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.